What an amazing coincidence that Trump's new obsession, the desire to have Greenland, could make him loads of money. And so, between the war motivations and the money motivations that enrich Trump's key constituencies of fossil fuel corporations, tech douchebags, and himself, I think we have to take this one seriously. I think Trump might actually try to take Greenland.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can't stick to your story if you think it flies. But I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 14th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And today's episode is going to be about Greenland, because President Trump keeps saying that he wants the United States to have Greenland. And so I was wondering, is this like a weird Trump thing, or is there something to the idea? And I got some answers, because congressional Republicans, at least, are taking the idea seriously enough to have had a hearing about it. And so today I want you to hear highlights of the conversation that is being had in Congress. Specifically, you'll hear conversations about how Greenland is desirable for its war-fighting location and natural resources. Basically, it all boils down to they want Greenland because of war and money. And really, what foreign policy issue doesn't boil down to war and money nowadays? And Greenland, I'll say this much right in the beginning. The people of Greenland and the United States, they should keep an eye on this Trump wants Greenland issue. Because if there's one thing I now know for sure, and you will too after hearing this episode, this Greenland thing is not a joke. They aren't trolling here. And as insane as it seems on its face that we might fight Denmark soon, I don't know, man. The Trump 2.0 administration seems impulsive and stupid enough to do just about anything. And the only people who really have the power to stand in Donald Trump's way are in Congress. And, well, hear what's happening in Congress for yourself in this episode today. I don't hear a lot of people trying to stand in front of this and say stop. But before I get started with all of the Greenland stuff, I do want to let you know what happened that delayed this episode. I think a lot of people have already heard this, especially if you listen to my other podcast, We're Not Wrong, because it happened live on We're Not Wrong. But seeing as this is a public episode of Congressional Dish, this happened since the last time you heard my voice. So the last time I released an episode of Congressional Dish, it was on March 24th. And 2 days later, March 26th, was my birthday. Happy birthday to me. Except my birthday landed on a Wednesday this year, and I record We're Not Wrong on Wednesdays with Justin, Robert Young, and Andrew Heaton. And so I was like, fine, I don't really want to work on my birthday, but I will work on my birthday. I'll be a good girl. And so I ended up recording remotely because Justin's wife had COVID. And so while we were recording, I reached for a glass of water and accidentally dumped it on my laptop. And after letting it dry for a few days, it never came back to life. It was officially dead. And so I had to get a brand new laptop. So that is what I have been dealing with and what delayed this episode a little bit. And the reason I'm telling you this is that I'm going to give you the same opportunity that the We're Not Wrong audience has taken, and that is to maybe help me pay for the new laptop. And I will say I am quite proud of the fact that I drove that other now drowned laptop into the ground. They told me that they could probably replace the inside of the laptop, but then when they saw the condition of it, they told me that, nah, I really should get a new one because the screen was cracked, there was a dent in the side, and the letter C had been missing for a long time. I'd gotten that laptop before COVID, so I did a really good job of managing your money, but I did have to have this unexpected expense of getting a new laptop. And so the people who saw this happen to me on We're Not Wrong have been sending in Venmos to Jennifer-Briney with laptop emojis, and that has been really awesome. Although there's definitely jokes coming in along with the Venmos and some creative names. I think my favorite one has been the Liquidated Electronics Reclamation Fund. That was quite clever. But if you can help me pay for the new laptop, that would be really great if you're not supporting the show already regularly. And so to do that on Venmo, all you have to do is find at Jennifer-Briney. It's a picture of my face. And of course, you can find that in the show notes. And then, of course, if you want to stop hearing these pay me for whatever reason pitches in each of these episodes, we do delete these for everyone who pays for the show regularly on Patreon. And so if you're sick of hearing me asking you for money for various reasons, usually the reason is because this show is valuable, and so I ask you return the value in some kind of financial form. But, today it's because I'm an idiot and I drowned my laptop. There's always a different reason. But if you want to stop hearing all the reasons, all you have to do is pay for the show. And so you can do that on Patreon. And along with your Patreon contribution, you get access to Last Week in Congress. These are video episodes. I've now done more than 12 of them. They are going great and everyone seems to love them. And it's basically me sitting down with the Congressional Record and telling you what happened last week in Congress. So yeah, please help me out. Thanks so much if you already have. And now let's get to the show. So let's get started with just a few bullet points of what I think are necessary historical data points about the United States' relationship with Greenland. And since this entire global economy experiment started in the aftermath of World War II, that's where we're going to start our Greenland timeline today. And so Denmark, which is a country that is located in Northern Europe, it's a peninsula/island cluster that's basically like Germany's hat. It's right to the north of Germany. Well, Denmark has had effective control over Greenland since 1814. Although since 1979, Greenland has been a territory of Denmark, and so Greenland does have its own government. But the residents of Greenland are citizens of Denmark, with the rights and benefits of citizens of Denmark. And if we are talking about taking control of Greenland, that means we are talking about taking it away from Denmark. And so Denmark is a key player in this story. As for Greenland itself, the landmass of Greenland, I didn't really realize, it's enormous. It's wicked far north and has only 56,000 people living there. And so for comparison, that's about the same number of people who live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, or South Haven, Mississippi, or Carson City, Nevada. These are not big towns. But that is the population of all of Greenland. And so that's not a lot of people, but for that number of people, they have a lot of land. So here in the United States, we tend to think of Texas as a pretty big state. Well, Greenland is an island that is 3 times larger than the state of Texas. And also, I didn't realize this until I studied the map, but Greenland is located closer to North America than it is to Europe. If you look at a map, the southern tip of Greenland is not at all far away from Canada. And the western edge of Greenland is above Hartford, Connecticut, which was news to me, probably because I've never really thought about Greenland at all. All I knew before this episode was that Greenland is mostly ice and Iceland is mostly green. But I thought all of that was over in Europe. But geographically, no, Greenland really can be considered North America. After all, it's on the North American tectonic plate. And so the arrangement that was made for Greenland's protection, knowing that geography during World War II, and actually makes a lot of sense. Because Denmark was occupied by Nazi Germany, and so to protect the island of Greenland, the Danish ambassador to Washington, D.C., signed an agreement with the U.S. Secretary of State putting Greenland under U.S. military protection. But after World War II, the Danish government said, well, that's over now. Can you get the fuck out of Greenland? And we said, nah. And so eventually, the compromise was worked out between the United States and Denmark. In order for the Danish government to get control of most of the enormous island back, in 1951, the Danish government signed a defense agreement allowing the United States to have military bases on Greenland, in return for us giving up our occupation and therefore control of the island. But that deal started a series of events that has led to real and sustained bad blood between some residents of Greenland and the United States, specifically the United States military. Because as a part of the creation of the big military base that we still have on Greenland, we kicked 27 families out of their homes, which is a lot of families in a place with so few people. And we didn't allow them to hunt in their usual locations anymore. They still can't hunt there to this day, and they're still pissed about it. And then in 1968, things got much worse. Because on January 21st, 1968, an American B-52 bomber aircraft carrying 4 nuclear bombs flew from New York over Greenland. during a time when anti-Soviet Union paranoia led our leaders to keep approximately 12 nuclear-armed bombers flying in the air at all times. And, at that time, it was a long-standing Danish policy that nuclear weapons were not allowed anywhere on or over its territory. But, regardless of us knowing that, we flew nuclear bombs over Greenland anyway, and as happens sometimes, there was an accident on the plane. A fire broke out under a metal box under the lower crew compartment, which led to the pilots and crew ejecting themselves from the plane. The empty plane, full of nuclear bombs, then crashed into the water at North Star Bay in Greenland, about 10 miles away from a town and not far from our military base. After the crash, the Air Force reported that they had found pieces of all 4 bombs, which meant that the explosives surrounding all of the bombs had to some extent exploded during the crash. But they exploded without setting off the actual nuclear devices, which were not armed at the time of the accident, thank God. But the explosions still contaminated the area with radiation. However, reporting by the BBC in 2008 suggested that the search teams only found pieces of 3 of the bombs, which means that one of the nuclear bombs could be intact and missing off the coast of Greenland. It remains a mystery to this day. And so, with this accident, the residents of Greenland and Greenland's owners in Denmark found out that we were flying nuclear weapons over Greenland's territory. On top of that, in the 1990s, they also found out that we had stored nuclear weapons in Greenland itself, which is a total violation of our deals with Denmark. These were huge scandals in Greenland and Denmark, and to this day, Greenland residents are not fishing in the area where the plane crashed, and they are concerned about nuclear and fossil fuel contamination of other parts of Greenland where the U.S. military had bases. And they are getting more concerned about this as the climate changes, as the ice melts, and the contamination under the ice could be exposed. The residents of Greenland, I think for good reason, are pissed about the environmental damage we have already caused with our broken promises, and they are suspicious of our government. And so now, let's talk about today. And let's get into the President Trump of it all so that we can move on quickly from him and on to Congress. And I don't think you need a whole sound clip montage to know that President Trump has been talking about us needing to have Greenland for a while now. I remember it starting the first time he was president. But that never felt like an actual thing that would happen, and so I never took it all that seriously. But President Trump 2.0, he keeps saying it. And so here's some of Trump's Greenland word salad from March 28th, 2025, when President Trump took questions from reporters during a swearing-in ceremony for a U.S. attorney for New Jersey. And just so you know, there's a weird blip in the C-SPAN feed, so that's what that cut is. I haven't edited anything out of this.
We need Greenland, very importantly, for international security. We have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can. If you look at Greenland right now, if you look at the waterways, you have Chinese and Russian ships all over the place. And we're not going to be able to do that. We're not relying on Denmark or anybody else to take care of that situation. And we're not talking about peace for the United States. We're talking about world peace. We're talking about international security. And right now, you look at it, you have warships all over the place going through right along Greenland. We're not going to let that happen. We cannot let that happen. Or if it's going to happen, we have to be protective of our country. And more important, really protection not only of our country, of the world. So Greenland is very important. And modern day weaponry makes Greenland 100 years ago, less so. But also, if you notice, also some of those, you could call them roadways, okay? They're water roadways. But some of those areas are opening up, and they're opening up icebreakers out there. They're opening them, and by just nature, they're opening up, and they're headed right into China, right into Russia, and we have no choice.
Water roadways. It is hilarious to me that people think this guy is some kind of evil mastermind or strategic genius. Water roadways. Ugh. But despite Trump's horrendous abuses of the English language, the conversation in Congress is actually helpful in understanding where Donald Trump got the ingredients for that word salad. And so to get us started with the testimony that was given on February 12th in the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, here's Alexander Gray. Right now, he is the Senior Fellow in National Security Affairs at the American Foreign Policy Council, which is a conservative think tank born the same year I was. But this particular think tanker, Alexander Gray, has a connection to Trump world that makes his opinion worth listening to if you want to understand who might be feeding Trump his word salad fixins. Because during Donald Trump's first term, this guy, Alexander Gray, was a high-ranking staffer on Trump's National Security Council and his National Economic Council. Donald Trump has listened to this guy for a long time in issues related to war and money. And on top of that, Alexander Gray worked in the executive office of the president, which is like the White House department, and it was his job to focus on maintaining the health and resiliency profits of the military corporations and the shipping industry. And so if this guy isn't the chef of Donald Trump's word salad, he definitely went to the same culinary school as whoever is. And so here's Alexander Gray presenting Congress with what he considers a relevant history lesson.
The U.S. actually occupied Greenland during World War II because it was so essential that we keep the Nazis from occupying it and being able to base U-boats from there or potentially to launch bombers against the east coast of the United States from Greenland. The United States has attempted to purchase Greenland at least 4 times, depending on how you count, starting in 1867 and as recently as 1955. Administrations of both parties, Harry Truman, Franklin Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, all seriously considered bringing Greenland closer to the United States because the strategic logic is so clear.
And what is that logic? Well, here is our current Secretary of State, Lil Marco Rubio, at his Senate confirmation hearing.
I think we need to understand that Greenland has been strategically important to the United States and to the West for a very long time. In fact, in 1941, at the outbreak of World War II, the United States was signed up as a protectorate, even though the Denmark had been occupied. You think back into the night, I think Harry Truman tried to buy Denmark. Harry Truman had made an effort to try to buy it for like $100 million. He was rebuffed. And then the U.S. has maintained through a mutual defense agreement there the opportunity to base itself, to have military bases, and it had them for a while. Why? The reason why is because of where it's located geographically. Yes, the access to the minerals on Greenland are critically important. But as more navigable space is opening up in the Arctic, particularly this northern passage that goes from Russia to China, Russia to Asia, and could cut transit times by as much as 40%, the Arctic is going to become incredibly critical. And so we have to have a presence there. We have to have a presence there, not just saying, okay, we have a base, we have 200 people, or we have a flag flying. We have to have the ability, for example, to have the ships that can navigate on the naval level and keep those shipping lanes open if, in fact, they're being threatened. We have to have partners along the Arctic region that will join us in ensuring that the Arctic region is open for free and flow of navigation as these passages open up, because global trade is in many ways going to be infused by it.
So the strategic importance of Greenland is largely about shipping lanes. So much of my awakening to the true nature of our role in the world has been about shipping lanes. Because we have military bases all over the world, and we all know that we have a justified reputation as the world police. But what are we policing? Well, in example after example, we've discovered that the United States military is making the world safe for corporations to move their shit around. I mean, even in the last couple of months, President Trump, the peace candidate, has been bombing the shit out of Yemen. And the bombings even have a name. Our Fox News host turned Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has named it Operation Rough Rider. And as of April 4th, the Trump administration has dropped about $200 million worth of bombs on Yemen. Now, you've probably heard about this lately because one of the bombings was planned over a Signal chat, which whoopsie-daisy included a journalist. But there hasn't been nearly enough examination in this country of why the Trump administration was bombing Yemen without congressional approval. Well, it's because the armed group in Yemen called the Houthis have made it dangerous for corporate ships to pass through the Red Sea. And the Houthis have been very clear about why they're doing this. They are making the Red Sea dangerous for international commerce, while Israel is permitted to continuously starve and slaughter the trapped population of the Gaza Strip. During the recent ceasefire, the corporate ships traveled safely through the Red Sea. But since Israel violated the ceasefire and refused to allow any food, water, medicine, electricity, anything into Gaza since the beginning of March, and restarted their horrific, relentless bombings again, well, starting in mid-March, the Houthis have resumed their missiles and drones and rocket launches against Israel-connected corporate schlepping ships in the Red Sea, and they've been launching those things at Israel itself. Now, President Biden was also bombing Yemen with smaller bombs, but President Biden was also bombing Yemen for the same reason during his facilitation of the destruction of Gaza. Our leaders have been literally valuing corporate shipping shortcuts over human life for years. And so I guess it shouldn't be much of a surprise that the Trump administration is openly considering taking over a large piece of land, in part to control shipping lanes. And also, let's not forget the Panama Canal, which we examined just 2 episodes ago. This is also something that Trump says he wants to take control of, and that is also a shipping lane. And so I see our protection of all the shipping lanes as an extremely expensive corporate subsidy. And President Trump is not only continuing to use violence to play the corporate shipping security guard, but he is ramping up the violence and land grabs to further commit us to that role. And as far as shipping lanes around Greenland are concerned, well, more of them are being created by the continued burning of fossil fuels, another action that the Trump administration is accelerating. In an acknowledgement that the climate is indeed changing, as you will hear, as the polar ice melts, companies and countries are excited to take advantage of shortcuts that will open up through the Arctic near Greenland, through passages that, as the Titanic discovered, are impassable when they contain too much ice. And so to safely move through these new openings, icebreaker ships are necessary. Here's Senator Ted Cruz, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, during the hearing.
Also key to our operational presence and influence in the Arctic is a healthy number of polar icebreakers. The U.S. built its last heavy icebreaker nearly 5 decades ago. Meanwhile, China has 4, and Russia has over 40, whose warships increasingly appear near Alaska. The only operational United States heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star, is 20 years beyond its service life. This is simply unacceptable. President Trump has highlighted the urgent need for a new fleet, and as chairman, I'm committed to ending Russian and Chinese icebreaker dominance. Executing on this quickly, not waiting for years and years on piecemeal annual appropriations, is vital for our national security, the economic productivity of Alaska and the Arctic, and our national shipbuilding capacity at American shipyards like Keppel-Anfels and Bollinger.
Now, I don't know anything about Keppel-Anfels, but Bollinger, that's a company I've heard of before. Because Bollinger Shipyards of Mississippi is a company that has spent $280,000 a year lately to pay 2 lobbyists to roam around and schmooze for them in Congress. And individuals associated with Bollinger Shipyards passed out over $500,000 to members of Congress during the last election season, with more than 85% of that money going to Republicans. And what a coincidence that a subsidiary of Bollinger, VT Halter Marine Incorporated, was recently awarded a contract by the Coast Guard to build a brand new heavy icebreaker. If this contract is completed in full, this company will make 3 total ships and bring in almost $1.9 billion of our tax money. There's big money to be made in being the world's shipping lane police, especially if Congress can be convinced to sign us up for an icebreaker building race with China and Russia, which China and Russia are already winning. And those 2 countries, they actually might be working together, but that right now is kind of unclear. Because in February of 2022, days before Russia's President Vladimir Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine, China's President Xi Jinping and President Putin met in Beijing, China, where they discussed the creation of a polar Silk Road, which is an idea that they had first announced together in 2017. Now, the Polar Silk Road idea is just like China's Belt and Road Initiative, which we've discussed many times on this show. But the idea overall is for China to build and therefore control transportation infrastructure all over the world. And so the Polar Silk Road would be the Arctic piece of that puzzle. But this partnership with Russia, it's unclear what the status is right now because China hasn't really been pursuing anything there in the past few years since the Ukraine invasion, which might explain the main focus of these war conversations in this hearing being pretty much only on Russia. Because controlling the waters around Greenland, it's not just about corporate ship protection. There are war considerations here as well. So here's President Trump's former National Security Council and National Economic Council staffer, Alexander Gray.
The island has 27,000 miles of coastline. At its shortest point, it's about 1,100 miles of flying time to the United States. Over the past several decades, foreign vessels have repeatedly arrived in Greenlandic waters without proper authorization or in violation of NATO protocols. In one instance, a Russian submarine actually showed up in Greenlandic waters and was discovered by accident. Unfortunately, our friends in Copenhagen have not devoted the defense resources necessary to ensure that Greenland and the coastline and the airspace is protected the way that it should be. As during the Cold War, the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap remains an area of considerable strategic concern for the United States as an area for submarine passage going to the east coast of the United States.
So the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, that's a critical consideration. And that is the waterways between Greenland and the UK, and then you have Iceland floating in the middle of it like a lily pad. And our military presence in that area, because of our presence on Greenland, and therefore our ability to control that gap, isn't what it used to be. Here's Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington.
Once we had 10 military bases in the world's largest island. Today, only the space base remains.
So we've gone from 10 to 1. And so here's the MAGA world concern as told to Congress by Alexander Gray.
I'm more concerned about a future political arrangement in Greenland that could be influenced or controlled adversely by an adversary power in a way that would prevent us from being able to exercise the type of control or the type of domain awareness over the gap that we have had in recent years. That's why I think these proposals that I've mentioned, that others have put forward for what is the long-term political arrangement in connection with Greenland, it's so important because we have to have the ability to maintain some sort of control and some sort of awareness over that gap.
And in order to control that critical waterway, that gap, they want to, at the very least, keep our current military presence in Greenland.
And finally, the United States has significant interests in the space base at Bitufik, which obviously remains one of only two U.S. Arctic facilities one of only two U.S. Military bases in the Arctic at that altitude that would serve strategic space interests, and there is no redundancy if we were to lose one of them.
The Bitufik base is the one that the Greenland families were evicted from their homes to create, and it's the base that is just about 10 miles from where we may have lost a nuclear bomb. But anyway, here's why that particular base is considered so important. Here's Senator Ted Cruz of Texas.
Greenland sits directly on the shortest flight path for intercontinental ballistic missiles traveling from Russia or the Middle East to the United States, making its positioning critical to our security. We have maintained a military presence in Greenland since World War II, particularly at Bitufik Space Base, which serves as the northernmost U.S. military installation and provides critical missile warning and space surveillance. The base, along with its deepwater port and airfield, is an integral part of our national security infrastructure.
It's an integral part of our national security infrastructure that Ted Cruz doesn't even know how to pronounce. But that's not the point. The point is, it has strategic value for our military. And there's also spook shit happening at that base. Here's Dr. Rebecca Pincus. She is the director of the Polar Institute at the Wilson Center. This woman has a PhD in natural resources and energy security, and she worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy as the Arctic and Climate Strategy Advisor during the Biden administration.
The Batufix Space Base is a critical forward location to U.S. missile defense. Greenland provides the westernmost location for monitoring Russia's naval activities in the Arctic and North Atlantic.
So we spy on Russia from there. But here's a key takeaway for me from this hearing. Here's Dr. Rebecca Pincus again.
It would be best to talk to the Department of Defense in a classified setting about what specific capabilities and access they may need, but I will say that the 1951 Defense Agreement gives us very wide access to Greenland. We have never had a problem asking for access and permissions and not getting it.
So Greenland is giving us whatever we are asking for. And I really don't think that should get lost here. Because, sure, Greenland, if you're someone interested in being the world's shipping lane police, and if you have the more legitimate concern of us having the ability to shoot down Russian missiles, yes, Greenland access is important. But we have it. And we haven't been having any recent problems with Denmark in this regard lately. And I think that matters a lot. But remember, this Greenland thing and our foreign policy in general, it's about two things: war and money. And there's money to be made by stealing Greenland's natural resources. Here's Senator Ted Cruz of Texas.
Greenland sits atop vast reserves of rare earth elements, materials critical for everything from technology to national defense. These elements are vital in the production of smartphones, military equipment, medical technologies, and much, much more. If the U.S. were to gain access to Greenland's resources, it could significantly reduce our dependence on foreign suppliers, particularly China, which currently operates a virtual monopoly on the rare earth market.
And to discuss gaining access to Greenland's resources, Chairman Cruz invited someone who would know how to profit from them. This is Anthony Marchese. He is the chairman of the Texas Mineral Resources Corporation. This is an exploration stage mining company that wants to be our nation's main supplier of heavy rare earth elements, specifically elements that help with the production of fossil fuels. And here's his testimony to Congress. And settle in, this is a long one, but it's an interesting one.
As the world's largest island, roughly 1.5 times the size of Alaska, Greenland presents a mining conundrum. On one hand, it is a treasure chest of not only critical minerals, but base metals, precious metals, and industrial minerals. A map prepared by the government of Greenland illustrates the obvious. Greenland's entire coastline holds what is indisputably one of the world's greatest collection of minerals in one jurisdiction. Throw a dart at any portion of the coastline, and you'll undoubtedly hit a potential world-class target. Conversely, the sheer topography of Greenland presents significant challenges. 1 mile thick ice in its interior, covering 85% of the country, winter temperatures averaging 16 degrees Fahrenheit, and thick sea ice, which potentially create clogged shipping lanes. While geological maps of Greenland present a vast array of critical mineral deposits along its coast, the presence of such deposits is only a starting point for exploration. Critical minerals vary in value significantly. Rare earth minerals such as cerium and lanthanum, although considered critical by the U.S. Geological Survey because they're part of the rare earth minerals basket, are not as valuable as neodymium and praseodymium, which are essential for magnets and batteries. Mineral characterization is essential in order to, quote, separate the wheat from the chaff, unquote, to focus on economically profitable deposits. Such characterization requires significant amounts of exploratory drilling. Drilling provides answers to questions such as, what minerals do we have? What are the estimates of the quantities we have? And what are the grades of the minerals we have? Drilling is expensive, and such costs in Greenland are magnified. Once mineral characterization costs are addressed, capital and operating costs of mining are encapsulated in a feasibility study. After receiving the necessary approvals and permits, the feasibility study requires drilling data, metallurgical data, processing cost data, environmental data, and finally, the downfall of many projects, commodity prices, or accommodating commodity prices. Mining in Greenland dates back into the 1950s. In fact, Greenland was at one time the world's largest producer of cryolite, a mineral used in aluminum production. Outside of cryolite, serious mining in Greenland commenced in the 1990s. Unfortunately, there has not been significant critical mineral mining in Greenland. In 2021, the government effectively ended a promising rare earth project because uranium would be mined as a mineral byproduct. As a result, Greenland banned uranium mining due to local indigenous opposition. Interestingly, a study sponsored by McGill University in Canada several years ago found that over 85% of the population surveyed favored mining, with the exception of radioactive materials. Without characterization, we do not know if future mineral deposits are accompanied by uranium, thereby potentially limiting development unless there are policy changes. An acquisition by Greenland by the United States could take many forms. I believe Alex just mentioned those. There needs to be a determination as to which regulatory authorities, if any, would govern mining projects. In the United States, the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forestry Service govern mining regulations on federal lands, while states like Alaska also give serious consideration to the desires of the indigenous population. At the present time, Greenland's 56,000 inhabitants are predominantly Inuits, an indigenous population which has a strong voice in environmental policy along with the governments of Greenland and Denmark. Regulatory authorities are critical to an examination of the economic incentives for mining. Characterization of mineral deposits is time-consuming and expensive, tantamount to venture capital investing. The USGS could provide government funding for such characterization to lessen the exploration risk for private industry. In this regard, it is imperative to remember that capital costs for Greenland projects are highly variable. Frigid winters create many restrictions, significant hurdles for timely project development. Lack of infrastructure such as roads, fuel, electricity, and housing exacerbate capital costs. Workforce needs would require the import of foreign labor, given that skilled mining labor is minimal in Greenland. Metallurgical expertise necessary to process mineral material would present further challenges, as such expertise is generally available primarily in Asia. Greenland's mining challenges would likely require the U.S. government to provide significant financial assistance in order to attract private capital, with funding needs required in both upstream and downstream development.
So, to summarize what I heard there, is that Greenland is a treasure chest of elements and minerals, but private companies have two problems. One, the pain-in-the-ass locals and the Danish government care about the environment, and their ability to make laws are limiting development. And so policy changes are needed, and these people are probably not going to change the policies. And so the subtext that I heard is that perhaps a change in government, like a change to a U.S. Trump-managed government that doesn't give a flying fuck about the environment, perhaps that could pave the way for unlimited development. And then the second problem that the private companies have is that exploring Greenland will be expensive and difficult, and so the private companies, like this guy's company, need a sucker government to pay for the exploration. But what government is corporate captured enough to do that? Because we know Denmark isn't. But this guy told Congress with a straight face that the U.S. government is required to, quote, provide significant financial assistance to attract private capital, unquote, and he wasn't laughed out of Congress. And so, what's the money part of this Greenland land grab? Well, it sure looks to me like a tax money grift for multinational mining corporations and the corporations that build infrastructure to support them. And possibly other corporations as well. Here's Dr. Rebecca Pincus. Again, she is the director of the Polar Institute at the Wilson Center, and she has a PhD in natural resources and energy security.
Greenland's enormous energy potential is often overlooked. The island has virtually unlimited hydropower around the ice sheet. Its hydro potential is very high quality and offers the potential to co-locate energy-intensive industrial facilities in the Icelandic model. The cold climate in Greenland would make data centers an obvious choice, although this would require a fast fiber connection to the United States, possibly via the planned Far North Fiber project between Japan and Ireland or through Quintilian's planned expansion. A fiber connection to Greenland would enhance regional security through a dual-use benefit to communications capabilities, and it would tie Greenland closer to the United States.
Cheap, plentiful energy for data centers. Sure sounds like something someone heavily invested in AI, someone like Elon Musk, for example, might be interested in. But someone is going to have to play security guard for those fiber optic cables.
We are looking at a set of challenges in the GI-UK gap related to Russian activity, undersea activity, that is a real problem set for us.
And so it's a good thing we're already signed up to be the shipping lane police. And so I guess we can just throw in fiber optic cable policing in for our corporate clients as a bonus. Anything to help these companies make money for their global shareholders. And then finally, there was one more money-making opportunity discussed in the hearing. Here is Dr. Rebecca Pincus.
Tourism is another significant area for growth. Starting this summer, United Airlines will offer direct flights just over 4 hours long from Newark to Nuuk. With tourism arrivals expected to double in the face of significant limitations on hotel availability and other support infrastructure, there is both a tremendous economic opportunity as well as need for strategic investment and development planning.
There are limitations on hotel room availability? Well, we're in luck, because our current president is a walking real estate corporation known for the Trump brand of hotels. What an amazing coincidence that Trump's new obsession, the desire to have Greenland, could make him loads of money. And so, between the war motivations and the money motivations that enrich Trump's key constituencies of fossil fuel corporations, tech douchebags, and himself, I think we have to take this one seriously. I think Trump might actually try to take Greenland. And so now the question becomes, how? Well, here are the ideas that were not laughed out of Congress. Here's the Trump world guy, Alexander Gray.
We have a couple options. One, we could make Greenland a territory, an insular area. We have 14 insular areas in the United States: Guam, American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, to name a few. That's certainly an option. They all have various levels of self-government. They have various levels, depending on Congress's intent, they have various levels of day-to-day autonomy. Alternatively, the United States could offer a compact of free association to Greenland, similar to what we have with the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau. This is, in my view, an excellent option, whereby sovereignty by Greenland would be maintained. At the same time, the United States would have a defense obligation and defense access to Greenland that would ensure that our strategic interests in the island are upheld. This would grant us also the right to deny military access to an adversary power who sought to use Greenland for its own purposes.
On top of that, Senator Ted Cruz floated this idea.
In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson negotiated the Louisiana Purchase with Napoleon, spending $15 million to purchase 828,000 square miles of land that ultimately became part of 14 states, many of which are represented on this committee today. From the Louisiana Purchase, we got portions of Arkansas, Iowa, Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Minnesota, Louisiana, New Mexico, the great state of Texas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado. Without the Louisiana Purchase, the United States would be a very, very different place than it is today. And then in 1867, the United States purchased Alaska from Russia, spending $7.2 million for what became our 49th state, and what ultimately gave this committee Senator Dan Sullivan. And indeed, purchasing territory from Denmark is not unusual. The United States purchased the Virgin Islands from the Danish Crown in 1917 to secure a strategic military position in the Caribbean, especially to protect the newly opened Panama Canal and safe-time maritime routes from Germany at war with Western powers. Which
I guess is good, because he wasn't talking about bombing Greenland. He was talking about buying Greenland. But, that takes a wanting to be bought on the other side. And I remember back in 2019 when this was suggested, the Prime Minister of Greenland said, "We are open for business, but we are not for sale." I don't really think anything's changed. But as for how the Democrats are responding to this, here's Democratic Senator from Washington, Maria Cantwell.
The good news is if we stop talking about buying Greenland and instead work quickly to reestablish U.S. interests, there have been, I think since 1951, many update agreements between Greenland and the United States. The one most recently, 2018, I think during the first Trump administration. These agreements are in place that authorize dual-use investments, new port infrastructure, fiber optic cable, radar, and power plants.
Which, okay, agreements are great, but why would anyone trust an agreement made with President Donald Trump at this point? Because President Donald Trump in his first term, for example, negotiated a brand new free trade agreement with Canada and Mexico and has already slapped random tariffs on both of those countries in violation of his own agreement. And considering Greenland is not denying any of our security-related requests, and considering that it's just wrong to steal land from other countries in order to pillage their natural resources, trade agreements do seem to be the wisest path forwards, but we know how President Trump is behaving in matters of trade. He's tanking the global economy with his chaos, for Christ's sake. And so the agreement path, that just doesn't look feasible right now, which leaves the most concerning option. And I am grateful to Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey for asking Alexander Gray of Trump World this question.
I just wanted to ask, does that mean it's safe to assume that you don't think the U.S. should consider use of force or economic coercion to take control over Greenland?
Sir, I don't think the United States should use any sort of coercive behavior toward a NATO ally, meaning Denmark.
And so for now, at least, this is where Republican senators are when it comes to taking control of Greenland. Here's Chairman of the committee, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas.
If Greenland's future were to include joining the United States, that would almost surely require the approval of the Greenlandic people, likely through a public referendum. This would be a mutual decision, and it is one worth discussing. For Greenlanders, there would be many benefits of becoming an American territory, including American citizenship, including billions of dollars of new American investment in Greenland that would raise the standard of living of the 50,000 Greenlanders there today.
Now, I don't love the wiggle room in the phrase, quote, would almost surely require the approval of the Greenlandic people, unquote. But it's better than the regime change language that we have heard out of Republican mouths in far too many situations during the life of this podcast. But I also think it's worth pointing out that the people of Greenland right now have Danish citizenship, which means that they have strong unions and collective bargaining agreements, and they are protected from being fired for no good reason, unlike us. They also have their work weeks capped at 37 hours, and they get 30 paid days off per year minimum. As citizens of Denmark, they also get visa-free travel and residency rights in all 27 countries that make up the European Union. They also get a year of paid maternity leave that can be split between the parents. We get 0 days of maternity leave guaranteed. And as for how much they get paid for their jobs, they have approximately a $16 an hour minimum wage. Ours is stuck at $7.25. And I think the most important factor is, as citizens of Denmark, they have health care provided by their taxes. Medical bankruptcies in Greenland, because they are part of Denmark, do not exist. And so why would the residents of Greenland want to give up those benefits to become an American citizen and therefore risk their financial stability and their free time? Like, for me, no amount of investment would make up for the loss of those benefits. Because here's a reality that Americans who don't travel really don't seem to understand. No one, and I mean no one, in Europe is jealous of the benefits that we get as American citizens. No one. They openly pity us. They have done this to my face, and they do so for good reason. And so the idea that American citizenship replacing Danish citizenship would be a selling point for the people of Greenland, it's a ridiculous suggestion. But quality of life benefits are not a part of the calculations of those who think like this. Here's Senator Ted Cruz of Texas talking to the mining guy.
How would the lives of Greenlanders be better off were they to become part of America?
Senator, I mentioned in my testimony that McGill University had done a survey of the population, and they were for mining. So I believe part of it is the recognition that were the United States to come in, more than likely, they would provide some form of financial assistance to allow private companies to come in and mine. And the vast majority, I think they said about 85% of the Inuits wanted mining, with the exception of uranium. That's a separate topic. The point is, I believe once the Greenlanders recognized that the United States would come in and provide a lot of assistance, that mining jobs would be there, and that's very important for the population. There just isn't that much mining right now, and I think that if there were the prospect of financial assistance to jumpstart the mining industry, I think you would see more Greenlanders interested in becoming part of the United States.
But we peasants, just like Greenland's peasants, we all take jobs in order to get something in return. So who would want those mining jobs if they come at the loss of time off, and at a loss of a $16 an hour minimum wage, and at a loss of job security, and at a loss of maternity leave, and at a loss of health care that isn't contingent on having one of those jobs? Again, no one in Europe is jealous of us being dependent on our bosses for access to a doctor. Our employment-based healthcare system is insane and is viewed as insane all over the world. And our lack of worker protections, which we are losing, not gaining in this political climate, is also insane. Europeans pity us. And so a promise of an American job is not a promise anyone with EU citizenship is asking for. And because of that, I would bet my life that the people of Greenland value their time and health more than a currently non-existent mining industry. And so if this is their pitch to the people of Greenland to get them to voluntarily join our show, they're going to have to do a lot better than that. Because Greenland residents, they've been very clear what their values are. And everyone in the hearing seemed to agree on this. So here's Dr. Rebecca Pincus. Again, she has a PhD in natural resources and energy security as the director of the Polar Institute at the Wilson Center.
They very clearly want independence. They're interested in developing their minerals, but also are very concerned about environmental standards. The Greenlandic government took on the authority over natural resource decision-making in the 2009 Self-Government Act. So Greenlanders fought for the right to control their natural resources, and I think it is unlikely that they would be willing to cede that control. So as we move forward with this conversation about potential acquisition, I think, as Mr. Marchese mentioned, the importance of the regulatory authorities will continue to be at the center there.
The people of Greenland value their natural resources. The people of Greenland value their environment. While over here in the United States, we allow chemicals to be dumped in our rivers. We allow chemicals to be dumped in our drinking water. We allow deep water drilling off of our coastlines, even after we've had devastating oil gushers destroy our coastlines and kill off an unconscionable number of innocent animals. We exempted fracking from environmental laws in 2005, and despite all of the known dangers to our air and water and climate 20 years later, those exemptions are still in place. And none of this is a secret in this world. The rest of the world knows what we allow. And the rest of the world knows the United States' control of your land, especially during a Republican administration, means less environmental protection, never more. But more to the point, the people in this hearing all agreed that what the people of Greenland have said they want most is independence. Backing that up, here's Alexander Gray, the Trump world guy. And just FYI, Nuuk is the capital of Greenland.
Put simply, and as embodied in Greenland's own foreign security and defense policy strategy that was put out last year, the ultimate goal of Nuuk is to obtain independence from Denmark. When this will happen is subject to debate, including in Greenland and Denmark itself, but for U.S. purposes, it is vital that leaders in Washington take seriously what the Greenlanders themselves are telling us, and what the last several decades of increasing Greenlandic self-governance and autonomy demonstrate. Members of the committee, the question facing American policymakers comes down to the following, in my view. When Greenland inevitably obtains independence from Denmark, as their leaders again tell us that they will, who is going to greet them on the other side? Will it be Russia and China, with their history of predatory behavior in small developing states and their unwillingness to respect such state sovereignty? Or will it be the United States, with our commitment to sovereignty, the rule of law, respect for the environment, and for the rights and heritage of indigenous people? Now is the time to begin laying the groundwork for what arrangements can be put into place once Greenlandic independence is imminent.
That characterization of the United States, at least the United States of my adulthood, is really something. Like, does Iraq think that we've shown a commitment to sovereignty? And do the non-criminals who were kidnapped by the Trump administration and shipped off to an El Salvadorian prison with no communication allowed with their families, nor access to a lawyer, do you think they believe that we're currently committed to the rule of law? Does the mining executive in this hearing room, who wants the United States to take over Greenland and change Greenland's environmental policies to make it easier to mine, really think the United States is respectful of the environment? And as for the rights and heritage of indigenous people, we genocided ours. My God, if Greenland is being coveted by Russia, China, and the Trump administration's United States, that's like being a snorkeler being surrounded by 3 hungry sharks. There are no good options there for Greenland if we are being honest with ourselves. And if I were Greenland, I would drop the bid for independence immediately and stay a part of Denmark, or at least until the United States changes administrations in 2029. Because 56,000 people, indigenous people on Greenland, are no match for those 3 particular sharks. I think Greenland is safest as part of the EU. And one senator, Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey, he physically traveled to Greenland recently, and so I think he was the best person suited to summarize our current relationship with the people of Greenland. And so here's what he said.
I guess what I'm just trying to get across here, and I also had conversations with Greenlanders over the course of the last week, is everything that we're saying here in this room, we're all in agreement that there's strategic value in Greenland, and we should be pushing forward on the icebreakers and so many other things that we should be doing. But I feel like we are getting in our own way by having this conversation about acquisition at a time when that's not even needed. I mean, I'll be honest with you, the Greenlanders I talked to were insulted that we were talking in this way about their own land, as if they're not even there, as if we can just purchase this and buy this, as if they are just an object. And that's what they said to me, that it feels like we're saying they are an object that we can just take because we are the richest, most powerful country in the world. So I just want to push back here because there's so much that we can be doing without having to own Greenland. So much more scientific partnerships, so much more that we can offer when it comes to minerals and mining. We should just be pushing forward in that regardless of what happens with a potential referendum going forward. So that if they do get to that place, we are already positioned ourselves as a strong partner. No doubt more we can do right now. But I just think that this is getting in our own way. And when you look at the polling, 85% of Greenlanders say they're opposed to becoming part of the U.S. 46% view President Trump's interests as a threat. If we are trying to solidify our relationship with them, especially in some post-independence position, we are burning those bridges. We are sowing sense of distrust right now that I think would make it even harder for us to be able to achieve that later.
And I think that's true, especially considering that the distrust began with the evictions and a lost nuclear bomb and lies about nuclear and fossil fuel waste a very long time ago. But the reality of the situation is that Donald Trump is the most powerful person on earth right now, and he's unpredictable and extremely selfish. And this hearing made me realize that his reasons for wanting Greenland, they make sense. And because his and his political party's main constituencies, the war industry, the fossil fuel industry, the tech industry, and of course Trump himself, because they can profit from control of Greenland, the conversations I heard in this hearing are causing me to take this far more seriously than I was before. I feel really bad for the people of Greenland because there's only 56,000 of them, and they don't have a military. They don't have financial power. If President Trump really wants to facilitate a takeover, how do 56,000 people fight off the tech industry, the fossil fuel industry, and the war industry all at once? You know, there are 330 million of us here in the United States, and those industries sure have us by the balls. And so I guess that's all I'm trying to tell you today, is that this Greenland thing is not a joke. And the developments and Trump's word vomit about it are, in fact, worth paying attention to. So I have some really good news for you about the last episode in this podcast, because I was really nervous about releasing the last episode, which was called Democratic Deception. And I was afraid that there would be a backlash. And that was because in the first Trump administration, there was I'm just going to use the word hysterical reaction to any kind of criticism of the Democrats. And so I was expecting that to happen here when I released an episode really showing that in the fight over the continuing resolution, during which most of the Democrats were pushing for a government shutdown, I highlighted all the reasons which I still maintain I think are correct. I have not wavered whatsoever in my opinions that I expressed in that episode. I maintain that a government shutdown would have been the worst possible thing to do. And most Democrats didn't agree with me. However, after releasing that episode, I got no backlash whatsoever. And we actually got 2 executive producers on that episode right away, which was kind of shocking to me. And it's one thing on a long list of things that have been quite shocking to me with this second Trump administration. I'm just finding, whether it's analyzing their policies or looking into the crystal ball of what the policies are going to mean or the reactions that Americans are going to have to those policies, I'm just finding that having lived through the first Trump administration is not preparing me for predicting what's going to happen in the second. And so I'm really happy to let you know that, I mean, maybe the first Trump administration is where we weeded all of the hysterical people out of this audience. Like maybe that's what happened, or maybe, I don't know. But the reaction gave me some hope, because maybe we're more rational this time around. I don't know what this is. But I do want to thank our executive producers on those 2 episodes, because the reaction to that last episode is definitely giving me more courage to go ahead and produce episodes like that in the future. Because I was nervous. I was really nervous about releasing that because it always costs me money. But this time, that wasn't the case. And so first up, I would like to thank Boyd Quayle. And with the executive producer credit sent in this message, I would like to use my first credit on episode 313, Democratic Deception. I appreciate the work that you and the crew at Congressional Dish more than I can express, but I chose this specific episode for several reasons. As a farmer and an employee of an environmental nonprofit, it feels like my world is crumbling around me, and I'm genuinely afraid of what the future may hold. It's easy to succumb to the fear and apathetic paralysis that so many of my peers have fallen into. I'm just going to pause this for a second. Is that it? Is it an apathetic paralysis? Like were people hysterical in the first Trump administration, but are now paralyzed in apathy now? That's a really good phrase for it. I didn't have the words, but those might be the words. But back to his message, he said, however, the clear and level-headed information I receive from every episode of Congressional Dish helps me keep moving forward. I can hear the righteous fury in your voice when you discuss how our government is lying to us, and it's comforting to know I'm not alone in this struggle. In episode 313, the line that particularly resonated with me was when you mentioned Massey calling the shot and revealing that the game was rigged from the start regarding the continuing resolution. In my personal life, I feel trapped between burn it all down leftists on one side and Andy Wakefield subscribers on the other. Hearing someone acknowledge the other side for a modicum of honesty is like a breath of fresh air during the fire season. Thank you again for all you do, and I can't wait for my next credit. Thank you for sending in that message. And messages like that make me feel like I'm not alone. I feel like I'm going insane. This whole thing just feels insane every single day. And your messages and your support, I've got to tell you, they're helping me so much with this job right now. So thank you for putting a credit on that episode. And I also want to thank our anonymous, the person wanted to put an anonymous credit, but also on Congressional Dish 313 Democratic Deception. And he sent in this message. He said, I would like this to be an anonymous credit on 313. I just wanted to support episodes like this that give an informed, independent analysis of current events in Congress that goes deeper than the political messaging. I'm really proud of that episode. I'm really proud to have 2 executive producers on it already. And I'm really proud of the way that you guys are describing my work, because that's exactly how I want people to see it. I want to understand these things better. Like, even though this Greenland episode, even though I feel like it's still insane that we're talking about this, understanding the why does help me feel calmer about it. It makes me feel like if it gets to the point that I have to be calling my congressman, I'm better prepared to have a more informed opinion that might actually be listened to. And just like having conversations out in the world when, if someone says like, oh, this Greenland thing is crazy, I'll be able to step in and say, well, there's war and money reasons for why they want to take Greenland. And it's not that crazy and we need to take it seriously. I think it's helpful to be informed as possible in these times. And this is just one of those days I'm really grateful to have the support of this community, because I actually feel a little bad I didn't have enough faith in you. So I also apologize for that. Yeah, thank you for supporting that episode. You guys made me feel a lot better. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. All right. I am going to go work on the next episode. So for now, I would like to thank Claire, who is back from maternity leave, thank God, for her production and research assistant duties. I'd like to thank Mike at Pro Podcast Solutions for editing this episode. Thank you, Mark at podcastbranding.co for designing a beautiful website and keeping it up and running. Thank you, Lauren, who is our bookkeeper and our executive producer services specialist. And by the way, if you want to claim an executive producer credit, Lauren at congressionaldish.com, that is who you email to get that set up. I would like to thank my dad, who is currently working on my taxes, or at least I hope so, because it's the beginning of April. I got to turn that in. But hey, free taxes. I'll take it. Thanks, Dad. And then, as always, I want to thank Brian Karras, who is our guardian angel. He was our artist for many, many years, who is our dearly departed. And so now AI has taken his job, but we will love and miss you forever. All right. I'll have a new episode for you soon. Stay sane, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.